Former Games Workshop employees, what are your horror stories? Not many horror stories. But as a part-timer back in the 90s I only got paid £2 an hour. Still I'd probably have just hung out there and not get paid if I didn't have the job. My favorite was the area manager going to visit a nearby store. And some kid walking down the road with a newly released Army's boxed set, retailed at over £100. The manager says to the kid as he passes by, "You just nick that then?" As a bit of a joke, and the kid says yeah and smiles. The manager then walks into the store and congratulates them on the sale, to which they realize that the kid has just walked into the store, picked it up and walked out with it, and no one noticed. Every store in the area had to store them behind the counter from then on. I had a friend who worked at one in Toronto. He said Robin Williams came into the store one day in a hurry. My friend said he was jittery and couldn't slow down enough to actually look around the store. He rushed up to the counter and talked to one of the other guys there and asked how much for one of the painted armies in the case. The guy was starstruck and said, "Oh sorry. Those aren't for sale, which they aren't for regular people." Robin thanked him and ran out. Later he told the manager this amazing story. The manager was livid that he didn't sell Robin Williams a full painted army for a few $1,000s. Not a horror story, but also related in the original thread. I once had an elderly lady come into the store in order to buy some shoes. Me, "I'm afraid we don't sell shoes, madam. We sell toy soldiers." Taking in the racks of toy soldiers and games with a sweep of my arm. Old lady, shouting, "I have it on very good authority that you sell shoes." She then stormed out to find a more accommodating combination toy shoe shop. Not an employee, but frequently play games at a GW store. Finally got the store to ban a guy for smelling bad. People would often complain that the store stinks. Smells like sweat and body odor. It wasn't the store. It was just that one guy. Don't feel sorry for him either. He was only somewhat overweight. Not autistic or socially troubled. Not poor or anything. Just a nasty and greasy jerk of a guy. We confronted him about it twice and he didn't seem to care. "Just deal with it," he says. Full stop. Hate to exclude people, but it's turning away customers and giving the store a bad reputation. Obligatory not an employee, but I know a few. This was early zeros. One guy worked a major store for years. The same young kid came in with his mom every week for months and bought some Space Marines. Never a lot, but a tactical squad here, a dreadnought there, since he was effectively a regular. And hey, nag factor sells boxes. Staffer tries to engage with him and mum a lot. "Your army must be getting pretty big now. How many points are you doing?" "Just 2,000. Confusion as kid has bought way over 2,000 points of Marines. Stuff keeps dying. And then it hit the guy. No word of a lie. The kid thought that when something died in the game you had to throw it away. Also, the usual non-horror tales of how staff discount used to be 10,000 point all metal IG armies with every squad and chimeras £4 symbol 100 etc. The number of rulebooks I own from Games Workshop is greater than the times I've been able to play their games. Me and my friends were avid Games Workshop customers from about age 10 to 13 until one day as three of us walked out we were stopped outside by the manager. We were pretty startled as we were just geeky goody two-shoes kids. The manager tells us that someone had told him that they had seen us steal something from the store. He then proceeded to search us in the middle of a crowded shopping area. We were pretty dumbstruck and had no idea what to do, so just stood there and got searched with lots of onlookers watching us. That quickly stopped our Games Workshop addiction of a few years. None of us ever went back. Additional, this was the very late 80s, and when I say hundreds of pound symbols, including birthdays, Christmases, we probably spent close to or over 1,000 between us. If you watched Stranger Things, we were like those kids in the very first episode when they were playing damned. I think I was about 13. Maybe 14 at the oldest. I discovered girls at 14 and don't remember my Games Workshop phase overlapping into this. My old store manager and one of the other employees had been out in town drinking. They decided to let themselves into the store in order to call a cab home, or just have somewhere warm to eat their kebab. I can't remember which. At some point they got into some light-hearted drunken tussle. He was ex-army and a big lad. So quickly pushed off the intruder. Slammed him onto a gaming table. Grabbed him by his tie, was wearing one, and raised his fist ready to twat him. When the clip-on tie came off in his hand, and he realized the person on the table was a police constable frantically fumbling for either radio or pepper spray. Since they were entitled to be there and the police had pretty much unlawfully entered and assaulted him, they thought the two employees were drunks who had broken in and were fighting in the store. Almost correct. Everyone shook hands. Thought there was no need to pursue it further and called it a night. You want a true Games Workshop horror story? As a small boy, 21 years of age, I ventured into a Games Workshop with a few friends and they happened to be doing figurine painting, so I gave it a go and painted a Hobbit figurine. Some point after this was done we were talking to one of the employees and I happened to mention that I had painted the cape badly, to which the employee responded, "It's a cloak actually." I know I was wrong. Just a slip of the tongue, but Jesus Christ. Calm down. It was more the way he said it than anything else. Edit. Cloak was mistakenly called cape. Again. Was a customer. Not so much a horror story but a tale about how I kinda got the staff in trouble due to my workarounds for GW's absurd pricing. About 15 years ago when the new Imperial Guard plastics came out, they were selling heavy weapon squads for about £20. That box gave you 3 heavy weapons. For context, my army had 4-5 weapon squads plus a weapon in every regular squad. So that got expensive fast. The box contained 3 bases, 6 troops, 3 tripods, some other fluff bits, and then 3 of each heavy weapon, 15 total. I was crafty. Bought a pack of large round bases and dug out my spare parts box for figures. Mounted the 3 LS cannons on the included tripods and bases with a single figure each. Mounted the 3 heavy bolters on the included sandbags and with an included figure on my own bases. Did the same with the 3 autocannons but chopped up my own figure to make him lie down to use the gun. The mortars I just mounted to regular figure bases. The missile launchers fit on a regular spare figure. All 15 weapons accounted for from one box. Some of the staff thought this was hilarious. Then they got a bollocking from the manager because whilst they push the whole conversion and creativity thing, it's totally unethical to encourage people to spend £21.50 instead of £100. I miss 40k so bad, but goddamn do I not miss GW. I have a story that was horrifying for me but only slightly related to Games Workshop. When I was about 14, I was interested in Dan but had no friends who played. Still, I went in a Games Workshop one day just to look at the stuff and there was this older guy working there. And I explained myself and he said they don't do so much Dan because it's less focused on the physical tabletop aspects. And they had a Lord of the Rings game set up in the table in the shop and he played a quick game with me. He was way older. Like probably in his 50s, but he wasn't bad looking and he was so charismatic. I got kind of a crush on him. I told my friends about it the next day or whatever and one of them was like OMG and asked me to describe him again and asked his name. And it turned out she knew him. None of that was the bad part. The horror was that sometime later, my friends went to that same Games Workshop and asked him if he remembered me, and then told him I fancied him. Apparently he thought that was hilarious, but basically I was scared to go into that or the other Games Workshop in my town. He worked at both. Apparently, 4 years out of embarrassment. Although to be fair, it probably saved me from developing an expensive hobby. Not an employee or a customer, but I saw 2 big guys have a fight inside my local GW for the last set of some small figures. This was an in-company horror story. We had an area manager when I worked at GW in the 90s, who was really into military reenactment. In his case dressed as a member of a Waffen SS unit. He was totally obsessed with everything to do with the German army in WW2. I remember bringing a German service record book into work that a family friend had acquired in the war. The area manager was due in that day, so we all thought it would keep him quiet in the back room so we didn't have to talk to him. Anyway, it did just that. He pored over every page and then offered to buy it from me for £50. I politely refused. It wasn't for sale. He looked crestfallen, but took it pretty well. It was only after he left that my manager said that apparently his entire house was dripping with Nazi memorabilia, and one of his prized possessions was a bar of soap made from the fat of murdered Jews. I literally had no f-king words. I mean, WTF. Of course it could have simply been tittle-tattle, but knowing the guy and knowing the atmosphere in GW back then, very white, very master race, it seemed perfectly feasible. I worked at the corporate HQ in Nottingham. Highlights were a sheet-covered dildo being found in the women's toilets, a factory worker falling down a chute which dispensed the foam inserts for the blister packs, a black lad getting sacked because he smelled of weed up. Turned out it was his hair gel. My mate getting a BJ from a cleaner during Bugman's free beer afternoon. The unfolding horror of how little their stuff cost to produce vs how much it sold for. The amount of stuff we got for free. We'd buy it through the staff shop and they'd never ring it through. The Mormon Mafia which used to run the place. Obligatory not a GW employee disclaimer. I was part of a big fantasy mailing list in the late 90s. Eventually we decided to have a viral tournament. We set it up. Get 40 people to come in. Rent a room at the local university. Set up drivers to pick people up and take them to the airport. And even fly in one of the studio designers. First day of the tournament arrives. And things are going well. After the second round of games, I go to take a break and get something to eat. I come back to the room where the tournament was taking place. Open the door. And nearly die. The smell. Dear God. It was like physically getting smacked in the face by warm, wet dirty socks. It was at least 8 degrees warmer in the room than the rest of the building. And approximately 85% humidity. Of course we hadn't noticed while it was funking up. But oh my god, it was bad. I'm glad I'm still friends with one of the other people who was there, who can confirm that the smell existed. Just recalled one where we had to ban a kid for nicking a dreadnought. They were metal beasts back then. And the squared and blocky design was still new. Kid came in with one day. And was showing it off to all the other kids. Really excited about it. But we hadn't sold one in weeks. And there was one missing from the shelves. And the one he was showing off was really badly put together. Like a real rush job. And covered in the most horrible and basic single color coat of paint. He was trying to say he'd got it ages ago. But had never mentioned it previously, something like those were always the pride of anyone's collection. And was now suddenly really excited to have one. Eventually he caved and admitted he had taken it. Month-long ban straight away. Not a customer related one. But a staff related one. Worked there for a few months about 20 years ago. Whoa. Okay. Now I feel old. GW had the place being run by one full-time member of staff with no relief who was so crazy busy trying to keep it open that he hadn't had time to find a home since moving to the area to run the store. And was sleeping in the back room in a sleeping bag. Washing in the sink. This was in the era when looking for a place to rent meant hours checking and calling the classifieds in the paper. Not browsing on your smartphone and applying online. Until I started he had not even been able to get out for lunch breaks as the store had to stay open. I was the second full-time member of staff there. And it was the first time he'd been able to get out of the store during the day to look for a new place. We didn't get on. And I left at the end of my probation. Just a personality conflict. Though the job was alright. Looking back I can understand how his temper was short. He must have been going spare. Not an employee, but I used to play it, though I really sucked at it, and loved painting the figures more than anything. A few of my friends started a local gaming club in our hometown because the nearest store had started preventing people from playing there, giving the reason of the new rules. If memory serves me correctly, the latest edition of Warhammer 40k from GW had introduced a new rule that said an army had to be a certain size, painted and consisted of models that were from the latest edition. At least that's what the shop staff said in a condescending and patronizing tone. So kids showing up to play had to have spent hundreds of pounds symbols on models and paints and had them painted to an acceptable level, which was up to the staff to decide, and new. I stopped playing completely around then. Gone were the days when you could make Kit Bash Land Raiders etc or use improvised models, which was the whole point of the original Rogue Trader edition. I remember a GW store employee nonchalantly telling my friend, who organized the local club, that having a local Warhammer club was against the rules and not legal. He pissed himself laughing at the thought of the local police storming the flat above his shop to seize toy soldiers as a GW official stands by to inspect their authenticity. Not an employee, but former girlfriend of employee. We were dating in high school, so there wasn't much to do around 16-17 other than hang out at the mall where my boyfriend worked. I was there a lot of the time basically as an unpaid employee. The amount of creepy guys in fedoras, cargo pants, thrift store blazer and video game t-shirt combos offering to buy me booze or trying to get me to come game with them was staggering. Not only are you hitting on an underage girl, offering to do something illegal, but you haven't had a bath in months and my boyfriend is 5 feet away. Disclaimer, not saying all guys with video game t-shirts are gross, since I married one. But any adult hitting on a high school girl is already gross in a lot of ways. Also don't understand why all these guys thought throwing a blazer over a t-shirt makes you fancy. Until my local store closed I had to always hear the staff recount the time I brought in a hot blonde towards the end of a date and she bought the Warhammer Fantasy starter set. Unfortunately she moved back to college a couple weeks later and now, 6 years later, recently got married. Just remembered another. Had 2 kids and a dad that used to come into the store regularly to play on the weekend. The kids used to punch on with each other the whole time they were in the shop, so naturally we nicknamed them Punch and Judy. The dad used to always brag about how expensive his new camera or his new watch was that he just bought. Meanwhile always complained that we didn't have enough price band A-listers in the store because he never wanted to spend more than that. The dad had bright white hair and always used to wear short shorts, so we nicknamed him Tighty Whitey. While Tighty Whitey would refuse to purchase anything significant for his kids' armies. One day he decided that he himself was going to get into the game and drop several $100s on a Dark Elder army. He then proceeded to join his children at the store every week and mercilessly beat 10-year-old kids with his cheesy Dark Elder list. His kids clearly were not his biggest fans, so they took great pleasure in watching a couple of us staff giving their dad a beatdown with some of our more competitive armies. Anyway, Tighty Whitey stopped turning up with the kids so much and the kids started coming in looking a bit more gloomy. When we asked where their dad was, they would simply say he's not coming in today. A few weeks later I was just leaving the shopping center for the day when I spotted Tighty Whitey. That brilliant curly white hair only further accentuated by the white blouse, high heels and leather mini skirt he was wearing as he strutted confidently past me and jumped into a waiting taxi. I used to frequent a GW sponsored store through the early mid-90s to play MTG. Around the time Arabian Nights and Antiquities were played regularly. Smoking was allowed in the store at that time. And someone tossed their cig into a trash can, think it was stomped out, and caused a store fire during a tournament. Every now and then I get a flashback image of looking back at the long table strewn with Moxes, Black Lotus, and workshops as the fire leapt across all the stacks of papers and books. The entire building was a burnt shell the next day. A huge bummer. I actually have something for this. I was a red shirt at the Memphis World of Battle in 2003 to 2004. Back then we had a battle bunker and tons of display cases. Before the single person store model shut that down. We had just received the new Forge World Bloodthirster and were putting it together and painting it for display in one of our cases. I had been tasked with cleaning up the resin with a hobby knife. Long story short, the knife slipped straight down the resin wing and into my left thumb. There was a lot of blood, and my manager was terrified and nearly fainted. I calmly went to the bathroom, cleaned it, and wrapped it. Didn't even need stitches. As far as customers, we never really had any trouble. Some folks needed a little more careful watching in the bunker on weekends cause they like to argue with every opponent. I was king of rules disputes for a while. It was fun.